this series of Islamic history and philosophy, we are now talking about life of Prophet Muhammad, and today I will talk about the first revelations of the Quran, and it all happened on Mount Hira. For this, I'm taking help of the book called The First Muslim, and I'm going to read a few passages from the book. So here we go. Perhaps it could only have happened when he was 40, given the auspiciousness of that number throughout the Middle East. For the Bedouin, for instance, it is a healing number, one that saves life. A common cure-all is called al-Arabin, the 40, a blend of herbs in olive oil and clarified butter. Traditional healers say it takes 40 days for a broken bone to mend, and a man cannot be attacked within 40 paces of him, home or tent, or that of anyone who gives him shelter. 40, that is, gives a new lease to life. And this is how the number consistently appears in the sacred books, especially that came out of the Middle East. The duration of the Great Flood waited out in Noah's Ark, the years of Israelite wandering in the desert after the Exodus, the nights Moses spent on Mount Sinai, the days and nights Jesus spent in the wilderness, all 40, the number signifying a time of struggle in preparation for a new beginning. For anyone fortunate to live that long, 40 years marked the fullness of time, the time to step into one's destiny. And so in the month of Ramadan, in the year of 610, as he had in the past few years, Muhammad sought the solitude of retreat up on Mount Hira. Here, everything human was stripped away, and he could be a part of the prolonged silence. As he climbed the familiar path, following tracks made by mountain goats, Mecca receded beneath him. He knew the mountain well by now, and by dusk he was standing in his usual place. He leaned forward as though into the wind, though there was barely a hint of breeze as the last birds darted for home. As the darkness thickened, so too did the silence, the kind of absolute silence that rings in the ears, a high, perfect tone that comes from everywhere and nowhere. A vibration more than a sound, as though the whole landscape is really sentient. The rock itself seems to be alive as it releases the accumulated warmth of daytime into the night. Then, as the stars begin their slow revolution overhead, there comes that sense of being a human all alone, and yet inexorably part of something larger, a sense of life and existence far older and deeper than the superficial ambitions and everyday cruelties of human affairs. Was this meditation or was it vigil? Did Muhammad stand in simple gratitude for the ordinary human happiness that had been granted him against all expectation, or was there a certain watchfulness about him, as though he were waiting for something about to happen? We only know that if it was peace he was seeking, what he experienced that night would be anything but peace. So what really happened on Mount Hira? We have what appear to be Muhammad's own words, but they come relayed through others at several removes, with each narrator struggling to translate the ineffable into terms they could understand. One account is credited to Aisha, the youngest and the most outspoken of his wives. She says, "He said, when the angel came to me, I'd been standing, but I fell to my knees and crawled away, my shoulders trembling. I thought of hurling myself down from a mountain crag, but he appeared to me as I was thinking this and said, 'Muhammad, I'm Gabriel and you are the messenger of God.' Then he said, 'Recite.' I said, 'What shall I recite?' He took me and pressed me tightly 3 times until I was nearly stifled and thought that I should die. And then he said, 'Recite in the name of thy Lord who created man from a clot of blood, that thy Lord is the most munificent, who teaches by the word, teaches man what he knew not.'" Now, this narrative continues in the words of credited to one of Muhammad's future followers, Ibn Zubair. So Ibn Zubair once again quotes Muhammad to tell the story. So Muhammad says, according to Ibn Zubair, "I recited it, and the angel desisted and departed. I woke up, and it was as though these words had been engraved on my heart. There was none of God's creation more hateful to me than a poet or madman. I could not bear to look at either of them, and yet I thought, I must either be a poet or a madman. But if so, Quraysh tribe will never say this of me. I shall take myself to a mountain cliff, hurl myself down from it, and find respite in death. But when I came near the top of the mountain, I heard a voice from the heavens saying, 'Muhammad, you are the messenger of God.' I raised my head to see who was speaking, and there Gabriel was in the form of a man with feet astride the horizon. I stood looking at him, and this distracted me from what I had intended, and I could go neither forward nor back. I turned my face away from him to all points of the horizon, but wherever I looked, I saw him in exactly the same form." Now, how to understand what Muhammad experienced in Mount Hira? Something that is literally metaphysical beyond the physical is by definition beyond rational explanation. And yet, while the attempt to reconstruct the mystical experience may well be absurd, one can at least be a fool for trying rather than a different kind of fool for not trying. The most practical way to pursue the question may be the one that at first glance might seem the least practical of all, by making the leap into poetry. Because the essence of religious experience at heart, it is poetic. Ritual and dogma are merely the framework of organized religion. They do not touch on religion's experience itself. It is the experience of mystery, of the indescribably enigmatic mystery. So let's start then with the idea of inspiration. Literally, the act of breathing in or being breathed into. The Arabic word for both breath and spirit is ruh, close kin to the Hebrew ruach. The idea of having a spirit breathed into you is thus built into the language, as it is in the second verse of the Genesis, where the breath of God lay upon the waters. But while this may sound wonderful in principle, consider that a human being is not water. Imagine being breathed into, inspired with such force that your body can barely bear it. It feels like every cell of your body is overtaken by it, and you are entirely at its mercy. Even as it gives you life, it seems to be squashing the life out of you, suffocating you under its enormous weight until it's useless to even think of fighting against it. This was what Muhammad felt on Mount Hira. He was left cowering on the ground, depleted, covered in sweat and yet shivering. He was inhabited by those words that were his and not yet his. The word he had repeated out loud into the thin, pure air of the mountain, into the emptiness and the darkness.